Briefly, just a quick introduction. My name is Daryl Dunbar. I'm a consultant across the life cycle of digital infrastructure, largely doing a lot in data centers, but also across the whole ecosystem. And I'm joined this morning by Manish Prakash, President and Group Chief Business Officer of BDx. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Daryl. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the Chief Business Officer for BDx Data Centers. BDx is a private equity-backed, high-squared capital-backed data center company, and we operate across 4 different regions: Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Indonesia. We have significant investments in this region. And we continue to kind of, operate more as a portfolio of I-squared. I-squared Capital is a digital infrastructure focused private equity firm, and we work across the value chain, from fiber to renewables to data centers and cloud in the portfolio. So we're part of that ecosystem, and I'm very pleased to be here today to speak to all of you.
Great, and thanks for joining us. So I saw you sitting there during the last panel, quite a powerhouse, well entitled, and perhaps taking some notes. So I'd like to get your view, sort of some initial feedback on what you heard.
There was a lot of interesting commentary that I heard from different parts of the panel. If you think of from a macro economic standpoint, right? I feel the whole ASEAN, community, if you think of that as an economic bloc, there is a lot of dynamics that's happening today. You think about from the basic fundamental economic drivers, from telecom and digital penetration. You think about the 600 million people who live here. Think about the private equity capital that's moving into this region. So you see different phases of growth in both in the digital infrastructure and the data center industry. But what's important is we've got to disintegrate that that whole divide into different economies, right? In terms of where Singapore is today, where Indonesia is today, and some of the other countries like Vietnam and Philippines, right? So, interesting commentary around how and what would drive that growth in the times to come. But I did like, what Chris was talking about in terms of the optimism that he has in the region and what you would see in terms of investment in this part of the world. If you think of the ASEAN bloc today, it's the 5th largest economy, right after India today, and one of the youngest again in terms of the demographics. So it's so much to look forward to in these markets.
Absolutely, and that's a sort of a perfect segue to my next question. But before I do that, I just wanted to say to the audience, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to raise your hand, jump up and down, do something. I will try to reserve some time at the end if no one has that impressive to get a question in. But so speaking of that, let's talk about the current sort of Southeast Asia market dynamics. And from the perspective of digital infrastructure, who are the key stakeholders in this ecosystem?
Yeah, from a again, think about I'm thinking more of Southeast Asia as one economic bloc, right? And when you think of the key stakeholders, first and most importantly, the government and the institutions. And government again, they're trying to come together on various policies, various regulations, in a way that they will support and drive penetration of the digital economy, right? The institutions are being set up and they're establishing policies and creating advocacy groups where they will go ahead and kind of increase the adoption of of what's been built in the region. The second in that category is the whole private equity and private capital and venture funding that's coming in the region as well, right? So, a lot of the digital investments, the digital infrastructure investments, have a very high degree of equity. So, in that sense, you see a lot of West and Eastern capital that's into the region. There's a lot of investment there. It's slowed down a little bit, but more to kind of, it's the pause where they focus on profitable growth, and I think it's going to turn around as well. So that's the second ecosystem. Third is in my mind, is the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem, entrepreneurial setup that this region has. And if you see a lot of activity that you see from a startup in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and in Singapore as well, right? So that ecosystem will foster local consumption. That ecosystem will bring a lot more, innovation and a platform that will ultimately help build the local economy again, the local digital economy again. So that again is a factor that works for the ASEAN or the Southeast Asia bloc. And finally, is the whole the consumers themselves, right? In terms of the demography of what you see in the region, the digital literacy of the population, and the growing internet penetration, internet adoption, both across consumer and enterprise. So these are four major stakeholders, and of course, to the point that was being made about Korea earlier in terms of the activities around activism around Sam, I think, was making a point around the harmful effect of radiation and all of that. So there is that element as well somewhere. But at this point in time, it's all looking very, very, very balanced in terms of how these actors and all these stakeholders are coming together to drive the economy.
Right. Would you agree, though, sort of at the center of all this are the actual data centers themselves?
Yes. So from I would possibly look at the whole portfolio being the digital infrastructure portfolio. From the market and how you see this industry, you've got the e-commerce space, right? Those are the biggest drivers in e-commerce, which includes the digital banking, digital commerce. That's one of the things that's driving the digital economy in this part of the world in a very fast way. The second is the whole ICT ecosystem, right? The tech companies, the hyperscalers, cloud, etc., right? And then what sits underneath it is the digital infrastructure. And digital infrastructure would mean telecommunications, fiber, broadband, data centers, and power, right? The renewables and the gray power as well. So that's the whole framework under which this whole economy is based on. And in that digital infrastructure is where we were invested in. We were invested as I2 Capital in a lot of portfolio companies in the data centers, in fiber, in broadband, and now even in renewables with our latest investment. From the data center BDx standpoint, we entered Indonesia in 22 with a joint venture with Indosat, it's a global telecommunication provider. That has since then, 2022 to today, we've expanded that already with two new projects that we've kind of announced recently within Jakarta. So most of it is in and around Jakarta. So there we've gone significantly. We've invested significantly, and we put our bets both on the enterprise market locally, which thrives quite a bit in that space, and also from some of the hyperscalers, especially from China. That's starting to now, you see them, they want to mitigate their risk with all the geopolitical situation that you see that's happening around in America and in China, and they're kind of moving out quite a bit, and they're looking for destinations like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. So that's the other market that we see quite vibrant within the local Indonesia economy as well.
Right, so while we're on Indonesia, I guess we go back to that slightly controversial statement earlier about whether there's an oversupply or a high vacancy rate you see in Indonesia. You're building another data center here, so I would guess, I guess I know your position, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, again, it's, data center firms and data center companies have a life cycle, a different life cycle that you would see, for example, in some of the other industries, right? So, Indonesia has seen a quick, in the last 3 years, possibly, backed up by what happened in the COVID time, as the consumption and a lot of the, data center needs went up. So you see this cycle where, a lot of capital flew into Jakarta, into Indonesia for investments into data centers. So there is capacity gets created, but data center again has a life cycle where you live with about 1 to 2 to 3 years at best on less than 50% utilization, and then you start to pick up again. The good thing that I see from my perspective, and I see where the previous commentary was coming from, but one thing that I see, there's a very nascent but healthy demand for artificial intelligence. Gen AI is bringing a lot of different kinds of use cases into the market, and therefore I feel that would very quickly consume that demand, the supply that's been created, and then of course the investments will continue to be at a very healthy pace in this country. At some stage, in 3 to 5 years, you will see consolidation, because that's the nature of the industry. But that's where we want to be among the top 2 or 3 players in this country to be able to lead that process in the times to come.
Well, I'm glad you raised AI, because you can't have a conference that discusses data centers these days without actually raising AI. And I know it's on a panel later today as well. But what do you think, just briefly, what do you think the Southeast Asia's role in AI will be?
I mean, there's an opportunity for both building and leading the framework itself of how AI is being utilized and deployed in the region, for improving essentially the return on invested capital. So there is that opportunity that Southeast Asia has. And one of the examples I want to kind of talk about is the framework agreement that the region is trying to put together, the DEFA, the Digital Economic Framework Agreement. What it does is it brings the 10 nations of ASEAN together in a way where you will see economic activity and data flow seamlessly between these regions. Now that's the first group, first part of, first block that you see across the world, right? ASEAN has an opportunity to kind of lead this with that, with that example. That would help a lot of contribution back into the digital economy. Different studies, but just pick one, BCG for example, it's talking about a contribution of $1 trillion by 2030 in the digital economy itself in this ASEAN bloc, right? So you see that opportunity both in terms of domestic or local consumption, and also kind of leading the rest of the world in terms of creating that sort of a framework that can be then used to leverage when you exchange and build infrastructure and connectivity with some of the regional players as well.
Sure, yeah, and the DEFA obviously is a great effort, I think, in collaboration among the governments, which leads us to the question about government and regulation. And obviously, with the exception of DEFA, which is clearly across ASEAN, there's a wide variety of regulations and government actions and perspectives on how they can help that out. Do you want to comment about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Daryl. Recently, if you saw both US and UK came up with a set of regulations around AI and how artificial intelligence is going to be managed and regulated inside the country. And there are ways to think about it, but if you look at the whole ASEAN bloc, right? You look at Indonesia, you look at Singapore, you look at Philippines. They all have a digital first policy, right? They've got some framework or some kind of think tank that's working on bringing a framework and an agreement and a bunch of policies that would help the digital economy. But again, the pace at which each country operates is very different, and the only risk that I see to everything that I spoke of is if countries start to over-regulate data, sovereignty, AI, etc. That's when the whole thing slows down. And again, that's more political. It's more government to government as to how these things will pan out. But it's that one risk that I see in these markets.
Absolutely. I would agree. I think it's one of the largest risks, honestly, and it's going to be determined on a country-by-country basis and over time. Before we completely run out of time, I want to turn and ask the audience, are there any questions from the audience for Manish? Anyone? Okay. Well, I have one more. Let's talk about sustainability. So we touched on, and there's an entire 20-minute panel on this, I think we can easily do, but when we talk about availability of energy and the shortage of transmission lines, there's a whole package in here. I would assert that up until very recently, sustainability has been a nice to have in the industry. Do you think that's now shifting and it's becoming a must-have?
Absolutely. And it doesn't. It's not just a requirement. And I'm speaking more philosophically. It's not just a requirement for countries and nations and governments to do this. I think it's a responsibility for each one of us, to leave this for our future generation. But what you see in the industry is the whole sustainability piece becoming central to the policy framework, and not just from a regulator/government standpoint, but also how capital is getting deployed and invested in various parts of the industry. So, what this sustainability index is one of the metrics that we now look at in new investments that we kind of evaluate. So therefore, it's for sure part of the overall ecosystem as a must. But even if you look from the other side, from the supply side, right, the technology and the innovation that's coming through, they're building a whole new set of platforms and products that would ultimately be far more efficient in terms of usage of power and far more better in terms of architecture, which would help drive sustainability targets both for companies and countries. We've just come out of a COP28 forum, and I think it's incumbent upon both firms like us or you consume a lot of power, right, and organizations and the broader government ecosystem to drive those targets for the better of the planet.
Yeah, point well made, and I think the governments and the regulators have to help us develop more of this renewable energy and then get it to the consumption. Well, with that, I think we've hit our time limit, and I'd like the audience to come with me to thank Manish.